Hey everyone, Casmo here, and today let's talk about tactical maneuvers in the Hind. First, I want to say thanks to all of you for watching and for subscribing, and if you haven't, please consider doing so. It's free to you and helps me out immensely, so I'd really appreciate it, and of course thank you to all my patrons. I'm incredibly grateful for your support. Maneuvering helicopters isn't hard, but it's decidedly different than fast-moving jets. Helicopters are highly maneuverable in their own way, but for the most part, cannot be flown like fighters. As such, you have to avoid certain things with the controls and have an understanding of what right looks like. So let's take a look. First, let's talk about what altitude and airspeed you should be flying at. This is mainly dependent on the anticipated threat. In a high threat area, low and fast or low and slow are recommended depending on what airframe you're flying. The Hind is not a hunter. It's not really equipped to go out and find targets on its own, and its doctrinal employment was primarily that of an aerial artillery platform, striking known targets in support of ground force maneuver. So with that in mind, sneaking along at treetop level isn't really recommended, and keeping your speed up will help you evade when you do find those sneaky ground units hiding in the tree line. High altitude flight is acceptable when the air defense threat is limited to unguided small arms. Above around 700 feet should keep you relatively safe from sporadic fire, and hopefully your wingman will spot the fire and be in a position to suppress. The danger of high altitude flight in a Hind is the potential for a retreating blade stall in a dive. Finding a target then diving in will increase airspeed rapidly, and at around 350 km per hour, the lift vector on one side of your rotor disc will exceed safe parameters, and you'll be rolling into the ground. Turning. This is probably where I see the most issue with novice helicopter drivers, particularly Petrovich, who apparently just transferred over from flying MiG-29s. Do not pull back hard on the cyclic, like, ever. There really isn't a need to. Gentle displacement of the cyclic will allow you to maintain control in a climb or turn, and particularly in a turn you might find your cyclic more forward than aft, with slight variations left or right to maintain your altitude. There's no reason you can't enter a turn at 250 kph and exit the turn 180 degrees or more later at the same speed. Simply roll the aircraft gently, apply a little pedal for trim and modulate the cyclic to maintain airspeed attitude. An increase in collective prior to the turn will ensure you have the power required to maintain altitude and airspeed accordingly. Once you master the art of turning without standing it up on its tail and becoming a stationary target, you should be ready to start properly evading enemy fire. Don't yank on the controls. Remember that speed is life. Smooth and small cyclic displacement is all it takes to change your attitude without losing energy. Evading fire is not a series of snap turns and rolls, but rather varying your altitude, heading, and range from the shooter. Keep your speed up, make small changes periodically to confuse the enemy's tracking, and egress his weapons engagement range. Do your best to keep track of where he was located, so once you're clear, you can roll in and lay it back on thick. Overflight of the target is not recommended, but I'll also suggest that at times it can be okay. I've always argued that it's harder to raise my weapon and fire overhead than it is to engage someone turning right in front of me. In a previous video, I demonstrated the bump firing technique. This will allow you to generate airspeed and change your altitude quickly while approaching the target, as well as leave you plenty of momentum to evade properly when coming off the target. Try to brake by at least 500 meters if possible. Rolling and pitching the aircraft can be daunting, but I promise you the Hind can take it. I try to limit my nose high and low attitude around 30 degrees, as anything past that sometimes get a little squirrely. But again, as demonstrated prior, rolling up to 120 degrees or so is perfectly acceptable, provided you have the altitude and airspeed to do something once you're there. Keeping in trim is probably the most unique difference between fixed-wing aircraft and forward flight. You may find your nose pointing a little off from your direction of travel. This is okay and perfectly natural. Called crabbing is the tendency of the aircraft to want to weather vane into the wind. Think of it like driving a boat across a raging river. You have to put your bow upstream to fight the current, resulting in a sideways path through the water. Same concept. Just keep the aircraft in trim with the trim ball and maintain ground track with visual cues on the ground. Hovering. This is one of the big misnomers in helicopter tactics. Some aircraft love to hover, and in some situations they should. But again, speed is life, and because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should. Hovering puts you in a vulnerable position. You're slow and you're at a high power setting. If you need to suddenly evade, you don't have a lot of options, as your power margins are very narrow. I avoid hovering the Hind as much as possible. For missile shoots, set up outside of your weapons range, get a comfortable airspeed and nose attitude towards a target, and make 1 or 2 shots before you enter the enemy's engagement zone. Quickly break off and push back out and do it again. It's not rocket science, but it does take patience. If the target alignment isn't right, don't push for a bad shoot and get yourself too close. Note the run-in heading, and make the next one a few degrees left or right as required. Flying helicopters is easy, but different. Come at the process with a different frame of mind, both from a speed perspective as well as visual cues. I can't stress enough, do not pull on the cyclic. Additionally, don't feel the need to move your collective all the time. If you refrain from drastic cyclic inputs, then you probably won't need to move the collective a lot either. This will reduce torque issues and decrease the amount of pedal work that's required. I appreciate you guys listening. Please subscribe if you haven't, and we'll talk to you guys later. Take care.